After a bitter argument, the husband packed his bags and moved in with his young secretary. Half a month later, assuming his wife had finally surrendered, he returned home and unlocked the door, only to be met by a strange man who chuckled and said, "Are you the ex-husband?" She sold the house and moved away. Outside, a persistent, icy Chicago rain had been falling since dusk with no sign of stopping. The rhythmic patter of raindrops against the eaves, mingled with the wind howling through the window cracks, composed a mournful symphony for a desolate night. I sat quietly at the dining table next to a meal I had reheated for the third time. The rich aroma of the snow-cooked beef bourguignon and garlic mashed potatoes Hunter's absolute favorite seemed to fade, carrying away with the thin wisps of steam that vanished into the cold air. The vintage grandfather clock on the wall ticked away the seconds with a cold, rhythmic precision, announcing that it was nearly midnight. This sprawling, luxurious penthouse suddenly felt vast, empty, and terrifyingly hollow as I sat dwarfed by expensive, soulless designer furniture. Hunter still wasn't home. My smartphone lay silent on the marble countertop, devoid of a single text or missed call. I had spent my entire afternoon laboring in the kitchen to prepare this dinner. Just yesterday, Hunter had casually mentioned that he was craving a real home-cooked meal after weeks of endless corporate dinners and entertaining clients. I had gone to the organic market early in the morning, picking out the finest cuts of beef and the freshest herbs, hoping to see a satisfied smile on my husband's face. Yet here it was, untouched. The heavy mahogany front door suddenly swung open. A gust of freezing wind rushed in, making me shiver. Hunter stumbled into the foyer, his gait unsteady, a pungent stench of scotch radiating from him, overpowering the savory smell of the food. I quickly stood up, rushing over to take his leather briefcase, gently asking if he had eaten and if I should plate his dinner. Hunter slapped my hand away with brutal force, making me stumble and nearly lose my balance. He glared at me with bloodshot eyes, webbed with angry, exhausted red veins, and barked, "Why the hell are you still awake? Why are you making all this a big deal with the food? It's annoying." My heart constricted in sharp pain. I swallowed a heavy sigh and said softly, "I waited for you so we could eat together. You said you were craving beef bourguignon." Hunter let out a bitter, mocking scoff and staggered toward the dining table. He stared at the beautifully plated food, then, without warning, swept his arm violently across the table. The steaming bowl of stew crashed onto the floor, splashing dark, rich gravy everywhere. Tender chunks of beef and creamy mashed potatoes now lay scattered across the pristine white marble tiles. It was a pathetic, heartbreaking sight. I stood frozen, unable to utter a single word. All the love and effort I had poured into this meal was treated like garbage by my own husband. Hunter slurred his words, sneering that he was sick of this life, that he needed something new and exciting, not an aging, blind wife nagging him constantly over cold, pathetic dinners. With that, he turned his back, stumbled up the stairs, and left me rooted to the spot amidst the chaotic dining room. I bent down to pick up the shattered pieces of porcelain. A sharp edge sliced my finger, drawing blood, but I felt no physical pain. The agony in my chest was 1,000 times greater than any superficial wound. My tears fell freely, raining down onto the floor, mixing with the spilled stew. I asked myself what I had done so wrong to end up here. I had dedicated the most beautiful years of my youth, standing by him to build his empire from absolutely nothing. I had sacrificed my own dreams, stepping back to be his steadfast anchor so he could conquer the corporate world. Yet now, when we had immense wealth and material abundance, was the bond of our marriage really this cheap? By the time I finished cleaning the wreckage, it was deep into the night. I didn't go up to the master bedroom. Instead, I sat on the living room sofa, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the relentless city rain. My heart had grown as cold as that ruined dinner. Perhaps a cold stew could be reheated, but once a human heart freezes over, where do you find the fire to warm it again? I sat curled up, hugging my knees, feeling loneliness seep into every fiber of my being. This was going to be an agonizingly long night, and I knew the real storm of my life was only just beginning. The next morning, I woke up to weak sunlight filtering through the blinds into the living room. I had barely slept, drifting in and out of fitful exhaustion. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of the shattered bowl and Hunter's cruel, merciless gaze haunted my mind. I stretched wearily, my entire body aching as if I had just survived a severe illness. The house was dead silent. Hunter had likely left for the office early without bothering to wake me or leave a note. His callousness seemed to worsen with every passing day. Sluggishly, I picked up my phone to check messages from the local charity group I volunteered for. My fingers scrolled aimlessly through social media, which was flooded with the vibrant, filtered lives of others, some flaunting luxury vacations, others venting about family life. I rarely posted, preferring to quietly follow friends and relatives. Suddenly, my scrolling stopped dead at a photo on my feed. It was a post from a young woman named Tiffany. I knew her. She was Hunter's new executive assistant, hired about 6 months ago. Tiffany was young, stunning, and sharp, with flirtatious eyes and a lethally seductive smile. Hunter had praised her efficiency in front of me a few times, which had given me a slight pang of insecurity, but I had always reassured myself it was just a professional relationship. But the photo before my eyes told a completely different story. It showed a man's hand tightly clasping a slender, perfectly manicured woman's hand. On the man's wrist was a dark brown leather watch with a classic Roman numeral dial. My heart stopped. That watch was the anniversary gift I had given Hunter just 2 months ago to celebrate our 15 years of marriage. I remembered every stitch on that leather band, and the microscopic scratch on the edge of the crystal that Hunter had accidentally made by bumping it against the table. There was no mistaking it. That was my husband's hand. The caption accompanying the photo was short, sweet, and dripping with deceitful provocation. The best medicine is the man who takes care of you when you're sick. Best guy in the world. Thank you, babe. Those words were like 1,000 needles piercing my bleeding heart. The timestamp was 11 p.m. last night. Exactly when I was waiting for him beside a cold dinner. He was with another woman, comforting and taking care of her. My head spun, and the ground seemed to collapse beneath my feet. I took deep breaths to keep from collapsing. So, my wife's intuition had been right all along. Hunter's recent coldness and irrational anger weren't due to corporate stress. It was because he had found a new thrill outside our home. He had forgotten the vows we made in our youth. He had forgotten the devoted wife who had swallowed hardships with him for years. Trembling, I clicked on Tiffany's profile to see more. The more I scrolled, the more it felt like someone was rubbing salt into an open wound. Photos of check-ins at high-end Michelin-star restaurants, flaunting expensive gifts like Chanel bags and Tom Ford perfumes, all the timestamps perfectly aligned with the dates Hunter claimed he was away on business trips or working late. All this time, I had been living like a fool in my own home. I had trusted my husband implicitly, never once checking his phone or doubting him. That blind trust had enabled Hunter to deceive me so brazenly and cruelly. My tears stopped falling. Instead, they flowed backward, pooling into a bitter, salty resolve inside me. I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back had dark circles under her eyes, and fine lines were beginning to trace her temples. Silver strands were threading through my hair from years of worry and labor. Compared to that fresh, youthful secretary, I was indeed aging and far less glamorous. But I possessed something she didn't: a profound sense of loyalty and a history of selfless sacrifice. It was just a shame that Hunter no longer valued those things. He had been blinded by the allure of wealth and superficial beauty. I turned off my phone and tossed it onto the sofa. I didn't want to look at those filthy images for another second. I needed to calm down and figure out my next move. A screaming, public confrontation? No, that wasn't my style. I was an educated woman with self-respect. I wouldn't degrade myself by fighting over a man who had changed his heart for a girl young enough to be his niece. I sat down, closed my eyes, and tried to banish the suffocating resentment welling up in my chest. A vague plan began to take shape in my mind. If Hunter had drained our marriage of all love and respect, I owed him no loyalty. I had to live for myself and reclaim the justice I deserved. The massive, silent penthouse felt suffocating. I walked up to my study and opened the bottom drawer of a cabinet, where I kept mementos from a bygone era. My hands trembled as I touched a frayed photo album. Black and white photos, yellowed by time, transported me back 20 years. We were so poor then. Hunter was just a fresh engineering graduate full of ambitions, but with nothing to his name except a beat-up Honda Civic and a passionate heart. I was a dreamy art student who abandoned the comfort of my wealthy family's home to follow the call of love. We rented a tiny, cramped studio apartment in a sketchy suburb of Chicago. It was barely 300 square feet. In the summer, it was a sweltering oven, and in the winter, the drafty windows let the snow seep in, freezing our blankets. I remembered the end of the month when our bank accounts were empty, and we had to split a 9-9 sent box of mac and cheese, and a can of cheap beans. Hunter always gave me the larger portion, smiling and saying he wasn't that hungry. Seeing him grow gaunt from overwork while still trying to care for me filled me with infinite love. Once, I caught a terrible fever. In the middle of a blizzard, without money for a cab, Hunter carried me on his back, trudging through miles of snow to reach the free clinic. His face, dripping with melting snow and sweat, lined with sheer panic, was an image I could never forget. In the album, there was a picture of us sitting by the shores of Lake Michigan, the wind whipping our hair. In the photo, Hunter was holding my hand tightly, his eyes shining with faith and hope. I remembered him looking directly into my eyes that day, saying with unwavering resolve, "Maya, just endure this hardship with me a little longer. When I make it big, I promise to make it up to you for the rest of our lives. I'll buy you the biggest house, the finest car, and I'll never let you shed another tear." That sincere vow became my motivation to overcome every obstacle by his side. I sold my entire vintage art collection, even my grandmother's diamond heirloom ring, to provide the seed money for Hunter to start his own company. I stayed up countless nights helping him draft business proposals, and I attended corporate dinners, drinking wine on his behalf until my stomach developed an ulcer. I sacrificed my burning passion for painting to step back and become the perfect homemaker, ensuring he had a flawless home base while he went to war in the business world. Everything I did was for one word: love. Now, half of that old promise had come true. We had the luxury penthouse, the luxury cars, and overflowing bank accounts. But the most important half, the love, the emotional compensation, the complete happiness, Hunter had conveniently forgotten. He forgot the wife who shared his suffering. He forgot the split boxes of mac and cheese, the sweat, and the tears that paved the way to his current success. Wealth had mutated him into a ruthless, heartless traitor. I traced Hunter's young, gentle face in the old photo, my heart slicing open anew. The man in this picture and the man who smashed our dinner last night were two entirely different species. Was time and money truly this terrifying? Could they erode a person's soul so completely? I closed the album and shoved it deep into the back of the drawer, as if burying a beautiful but tragic past. Those memories were no longer a source of pride or joy. They were sharp knives twisting in my chest. I stood up and walked out onto the balcony, looking down at the meticulously manicured terrace garden. The crimson roses were blooming brilliantly under the morning sun. They were gorgeous, but covered in thorns. Just like my marriage right now, the glamorous exterior hid a rotting, shattered core. I told myself I couldn't keep living in the past or this web of lies. It was time to wake up. I pulled out my phone and dialed Chloe, my closest friend since college. Her cheerful voice answered, asking why I was calling so early. I took a deep breath, fighting back a choked sob, and said in the calmest voice I could muster, "Chloe, I've made a decision. I'm done waiting. I want to live for myself. I want to find the Maya from the old days." There was a brief silence on the line before Chloe said softly, "I understand. I'll be right beside you, no matter what you decide." Hanging up the phone, I felt an undeniable lightness. Letting go is never easy, especially when the person you're leaving holds your entire youth and life. But holding on to someone who no longer belongs to you only brews more agony. I looked up at the crystal clear blue sky and whispered to myself, the storm from last night had passed. Tomorrow, the sun will rise, and I will begin a new journey of my own, even if the road ahead is paved with thorns. After that phone call with Chloe, that night, my heart felt strangely unburdened, as if a 1,000-pound boulder had been lifted off my chest. I lay in bed, listening to the city sounds outside, no longer feeling mournful, but experiencing a bizarre, profound tranquility. I realized that my endless waiting had been pointless. When someone no longer cherishes you, all your sacrifices become cheap. I promised myself that starting tomorrow, the old, enduring, submissive Maya would die, making way for a new Maya, strong and fiercely self-loving. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, but not to frantically prepare a gourmet breakfast for Hunter. I took my time standing before the mirror, brushing my hair, and applying an expensive moisturizer I had neglected in the back of a cabinet for years. I picked out a vibrant, fitted athleisure outfit instead of my usual drab, baggy loungewear. Stepping out of the bedroom, the house was submerged in silence. Hunter was still deeply asleep, sleeping off his hangover. I looked at the closed bedroom door with absolute indifference, no pity, no anxiety left in me. I slipped on my running shoes, walked out the front door, and inhaled deeply, filling my lungs with the crisp morning air of Chicago. How long had it been since I allowed myself a leisurely morning walk, without panicking over grocery lists, cooking, or ironing my husband's suits? I jogged toward Millennium Park, blending into the crowd of early morning exercisers. Watching elderly folks practicing Tai Chi and middle-aged women doing yoga with radiant smiles, I felt recharged. The world outside was so vibrant and beautiful, yet I had locked myself in a four-walled prison of loneliness and self-pity for years. After my workout, I stopped at a classic American diner on the corner. I ordered a hearty plate of sunny-side-up eggs, crispy bacon, hash browns, and a steaming mug of black coffee. The aroma of sizzling bacon and fresh coffee made my stomach rumble. I ate with genuine relish, savoring every bite without the anxiety of rushing back to do chores. The feeling of being served, of taking care of my own appetite, was purely euphoric. By the time I returned to the penthouse, the sun was high. Hunter was sitting in the living room, his face twisted in a scowl. Seeing me walk in, he immediately yelled, demanding to know where I had been all morning and why breakfast wasn't made, complaining that he was starving. In the past, hearing that tone, I would have frantically apologized and sprinted to the kitchen. But today, I simply looked at him with serene detachment and replied mildly, "I went for a run and grabbed breakfast downtown. Figure out your own food. There are some eggs in the fridge." Hunter's eyes widened, as if he couldn't believe his own ears. His jaw dropped, about to explode with rage. But he stopped. Perhaps my icy indifference and unwavering gaze caught him off guard and somewhat intimidated him. Without waiting for his reaction, I walked straight upstairs. I began sorting through my belongings, reorganizing my closet, and throwing out unnecessary junk. I wanted to purge my living space, just as I was purging my soul of its old, suffocating grief. That afternoon, I met Chloe at a quiet cafe overlooking Lake Michigan. Chloe looked at me with a mix of surprise and joy, saying, "You look entirely different today. You're glowing. You look alive." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "Thank you for waking me up. If it weren't for you, I'd still be drowning in that mud pit of misery." We sat together, talking about everything under the sun, reminiscing about our vibrant college days. Chloe advised me to stay completely calm, gather rock-solid evidence, and meticulously prepare my finances before dropping the final bomb. Heeding her advice, I realized I could not walk away empty-handed. The massive wealth my husband and I had amassed was largely built on my sweat, my sacrifices, and the initial capital my family provided. I wasn't greedy for everything, but I was going to take back what rightfully belonged to me to secure my future and to teach Hunter a brutal lesson about karma. I began plotting my next moves. It wouldn't be a loud, messy, screaming revenge. It would be a silent, calculated, and absolute demolition that would leave a traitor choking on his own regret. When I returned home, Hunter was out. On the dining table sat a half-eaten container of takeout, tossed carelessly aside. I didn't clean it up. I ignored it. I walked into the home office, opened the floor safe, and pulled out all the critical documents: property deeds, trust papers, and corporate shareholder certificates. Fortunately, out of sheer arrogance and blind trust, Hunter had allowed almost all of the major assets to be legally structured under my name, primarily because my parents' money had funded the LLC in the early days. This was the trump card that gave me absolute leverage in the impending divorce war. I smiled a bitter smile, realizing that Hunter's own hubris and underestimation of his wife would be the very trap that buried his empire. That night, I slept soundly without a single nightmare. Making the definitive choice to sever my emotional ties with Hunter had finally restored the peace I had lost for so long. Though my resolve was ironclad, facing the ugly truth was still a brutal trial for a woman who was naturally as sensitive as I was. Through a discreet connection, I hired a highly reputable private investigator firm in the city, specializing in high-net-worth marital infidelities. I never thought the day would come when I'd have to surveil the man who shared my bed. But life is full of sharp turns. A few days later, the young private investigator met me at a secluded coffee shop tucked away in an alley. He placed a thick, heavy manila envelope on the table, looking at me with sympathetic eyes. "Ma'am, please take a look, but try to stay calm. Everything has a solution." My hand shook as I picked up the envelope, which felt like it weighed a ton. I took a deep breath and pulled out the photographs. The very first image struck me like physical violence. Hunter, the husband I once worshipped, had his arm wrapped tightly around the waist of a beautiful, young woman as they walked into the opulent lobby of a five-star hotel. The girl was Tiffany, the secretary from social media. In the photo, Hunter was laughing brightly, his eyes sparkling with a radiant joy, looking exactly like the day he proposed to me years ago. The only difference was that this smile, this look of sheer adoration, was directed at a woman much younger and more beautiful than me. I flipped through the photos. There were pictures of them having romantic candlelit dinners, Hunter tenderly cutting her steak while she playfully fed him. There were shots of them shopping on the Magnificent Mile, Hunter trailing behind her, carrying bags of expensive designer brands like a loyal servant. And the most agonizing of all, a close-up photo of them sharing a passionate, heated kiss right inside a glass elevator, completely unbothered by the world. Hot tears spilled over my cheeks, dropping onto the photo and blurring the face of the traitorous man. Even though I was mentally prepared, seeing this raw, undeniable evidence felt like salt poured into an open gash. So all those long business trips out of state, all those all-night board meetings he complained about, were just pathetic, cheap acts to cover up a sleazy, clandestine affair. I remembered the nights I stayed awake panicking when he called to say his car broke down, or the times I rushed through the snow to deliver hot chicken soup to his office because he said he was sick and had to work late. He and his mistress must have been laughing, mocking my naive, pathetic devotion. The more I thought about it, the more disgusted I felt by his hypocrisy. He hadn't just betrayed my love. He had trampled on my dignity and the sacrifices of a devoted wife. The investigator also handed me a USB drive containing hidden audio and video recordings. I plugged it into my laptop and put on my headphones. Hunter's familiar voice played, but the words chilled me to the bone. He was sweetly promising his young mistress, "I'm going to divorce that old hag at home soon. Just wait a little longer, baby. I'm going to buy us a luxury penthouse downtown so we can move in together." Hearing that, I couldn't hold back anymore. I broke down, sobbing. He had been planning to throw me away for a long time. He called me old and ugly. He claimed I didn't know how to enjoy life. But he didn't realize that the reason I looked so worn out was because I had drained my youth and vitality to build his empire and manage his home. I had wrung myself dry to nurture this family, only to receive bitter betrayal and cruel insults in return. I sat there crying for a long time in the empty cafe, while the polite PI moved to another table to give me privacy. After crying until I had no tears left, I wiped my face and took a deep, stabilizing breath. Enough crying, Maya. Cry your heart out today, and then stand up and go to war. I told myself exactly that. This evidence, though heartbreaking, was the sharpest weapon I had to protect my rights in court. I safely packed the photos and USB into my purse, paid the investigator, and walked out. The sun was blazing outside, but my heart was as cold as a Chicago winter. I hailed a cab straight to the law firm I had contacted earlier. I handed all the evidence to a seasoned attorney and instructed him to draft the divorce papers. I also asked for legal counsel on executing my financial maneuvers. I wanted everything done swiftly and in absolute secrecy, so Hunter wouldn't have a second to react. The naked truth was exposed. Now it was time for me to act and reclaim my justice. With the concrete proof of Hunter's infidelity in hand, I decided to conduct a comprehensive audit of our family's finances. In the past, out of sheer trust and my own lack of greed, I rarely meddled in the money. Whatever Hunter gave me, I used for household expenses, and whatever he invested or spent, I never interrogated him about. I naively believed that a married couple shared everything what he earned was for our shared future. Now that my trust was shattered into a million pieces, I realized how disastrously naive I had been. I logged into the joint bank accounts. I was the primary account holder, but I had given Hunter full access. The password hadn't been changed. Luckily, Hunter was so arrogant he still assumed I was financially illiterate and would never touch these accounts. The screen loaded a list of transactions from the past year. The numbers danced before my eyes, mocking my stupidity. My chest tightened as I saw a barrage of massive wire transfers executed every single month. Yuan 美元, 2,500美元, even $50,000 at a time. The beneficiary was a name I now knew intimately, Tiffany Lawson. Trembling, I clicked on the transaction details. The memos read, birthday gift, car down payment, or sometimes just an emoji of a heart. It was a bitter, agonizing pill to swallow. I pulled out a calculator and tallied up the amount Hunter had funneled to his mistress over the past year. The number was pushing $500,000, a staggering amount of money that I, in a lifetime of frugality, wouldn't dare dream of spending on myself. I remembered the times I hesitantly asked Hunter for money to help my parents fix the leaking roof of their old house in the suburbs. Hunter would always scowl, complaining, "The company's cash flow is tight right now, Maya. Money is an issue. You need to be more frugal and stop wasting it." I had believed him. I had blamed myself for not sharing my husband's financial burden. I quietly cut back on my own expenses, even pawning my wedding anniversary jewelry to pay for my parents' repairs. It turned out his financial difficulty was just an excuse to siphon our family's wealth to sugar daddy his mistress. He didn't hesitate to buy her designer bags that cost more than my entire annual grocery budget or a brand new luxury SUV for her to joyride around the city. Meanwhile, on our 10th anniversary, he handed me a wilted bouquet he probably bought at a gas station and took me to a mediocre diner to cross it off his checklist. I continued auditing our investments. The majority shares of his company, fortunately, were still listed under my name. When the LLC was formed, my parents provided the massive initial seed capital and demanded I be the majority shareholder to protect me. Hunter, eager to appease his wealthy in-laws at the time, and before he grew his current wicked ambitions, agreed. The luxury penthouse we lived in and a highly valuable plot of commercial land in the suburbs were also titled solely in my name, protected by a rock-solid post-nup we signed years ago. Looking at the deeds and stock certificates, I let out a massive sigh of relief. This was my lifeline. If my parents hadn't possessed the foresight to protect me, I would be thrown out onto the streets with nothing today. Hunter definitely still believed I was a clueless housewife who understood nothing about corporate law or finance, which was why he was living so carelessly. He had no idea that the empire he thought he ruled was, legally speaking, entirely under my control. I printed out bank statements of every single transfer to Tiffany as evidence. These numbers would be my ironclad proof in court, proving his dissipation of marital assets for illicit purposes. He wouldn't be able to deny it. I felt utterly disgusted by this calculating, ungrateful man. He lived with me for years, penny-pinching every dime with his wife and family, while throwing cash like confetti at a stranger. I sat staring blankly at the stacks of paper on the mahogany desk. Money truly was a double-edged sword. It could provide a comfortable life, but it could also assassinate a person's soul. Hunter had sold his conscience for wealth and his loyalty for lust. But he made a catastrophic mistake thinking he could fool me forever. These documents gave me crystal clear insight into his dark heart, solidifying my resolve to destroy him. I neatly packed everything into a secure folder, locked it in the safe, and changed the passcode. From today on, I was seizing control of the finances. I would quietly liquidate and transfer the necessary assets before Hunter even noticed. A flawless counterattack was taking shape in my mind. I was going to show Hunter just how terrifying the wrath of a woman pushed to the brink could be. I was no longer the weak Maya of yesterday. I held my destiny in my own hands and the punishment of a traitor along with it. That afternoon, sunlight poured like golden honey over the terrace garden, but my mind was still a chaotic web of thoughts. After witnessing the stark numerical proof of my husband's betrayal, I dragged my heavy feet to the master bedroom, the massive room I had always believed to be the ultimate sanctuary of my happiness. I stood numbly in front of the massive walk-in closet that took up an entire wall. It was custom-built from imported oak, a birthday gift from Hunter last year, accompanied by his sweet words that his wife deserves the absolute best. I slowly opened the doors, the rich scent of wood mingled with expensive perfumes. Before me hung rows upon rows of dazzling, colorful designer dresses, perfectly pressed. There were glittering, $1,000 evening gowns that Hunter bought me to wear exactly once to his high society corporate galas. He always demanded I look elegant and aristocratic, simply to make him look good, to prove to the elite circles that he was a successful man with a glamorous trophy wife. I reached out and touched the cold, luxurious silk and velvet, but I felt absolutely no warmth. I remembered the times Hunter would scowl and criticize me if I wore a simple, comfortable outfit around the house, or how he would snap at me to change into something more revealing and sexy for client dinners, even when I felt deeply uncomfortable. Back then, I simply thought I was compromising to make my husband happy, biting my tongue and forcing myself into those tight, suffocating fabrics. I painted my face, forced a charming smile, and acted like a soulless porcelain doll just to please him. Looking back, I realized how pathetic and foolish I had been. All this time, I was nothing more than an expensive accessory in Hunter's collection of success. He dressed me up not because he loved me, but for his own bloated ego. He wanted the world to gasp in awe at his beautiful wife, luxury cars, and penthouse, yet he couldn't care less about the real woman withering away inside that glamorous shell. I yanked a crimson velvet dress off its velvet hanger. This was the dress Hunter had gifted me after a long business trip in Europe, a trip I now knew he had taken with his little mistress. The red of the dress looked like blood seeping from my heart. I violently hurled the dress onto the floor. Next was the crocodile leather Birkin bag, the Hermes silk scarves, the towering Louboutin stilettos. I went into a frenzy, ripping all these symbols of luxury from the shelves and throwing them wildly across the room, as if tearing off the lies and hypocrisy Hunter had wrapped me in for years. I looked at the chaotic pile of designer labels at my feet and let out a bitter laugh. The value of these items could feed a poor family for years, yet to Hunter, they were just cheap guilt gifts to cover up his vile betrayals. I didn't want these things. I refused to be a mannequin in a display window anymore. I wanted to be myself, a normal woman who knew how to love, how to hate, how to suffer, and how to find true joy. I dug into the deepest, darkest corner of the closet and pulled out a dusty cardboard box. Inside were my old, comfortable flannel shirts, worn-in Levi's jeans from my youth, and, most importantly, my old art supplies, abandoned long ago. I picked up a stiff, dried-out paintbrush and a clumped tube of oil paint, tears welling in my eyes. This was the real me. This was the burning passion I had buried to sacrifice myself for a family. I stood up, walked into the master bathroom, and aggressively scrubbed my face until the thick layers of expensive makeup were completely gone. Looking at my bare face in the mirror, with the crow's feet and aging skin, I no longer felt insecure. Instead, I felt reverence. This was the face of a woman who had survived the storms of life, who had tasted every bitter and sweet flavor the world had to offer. I smiled at my reflection, a gentle, yet unshakable smile. The long, agonizing nightmare was over. I was awake, and it was time to live my own life. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the penthouse was heavy and suffocating, like a humid summer day before a thunderstorm. Hunter continued leaving early and coming home late, maintaining his icy, irritable attitude toward me. He seemed entirely oblivious to the monumental shift in my eyes and demeanor. Or perhaps he was just too arrogant, too secure in his absolute authority in this house, to even care. I let him be. I stopped asking him where he was going, what he was doing, or if he had eaten. I lived like a silent ghost, acting more like a live-in housekeeper than a wife. One late afternoon, a sudden, torrential summer downpour broke the stifling Chicago heat. I was sitting in the living room reading a book when I heard the screech of his car tires in the driveway. Hunter burst through the front door, looking rushed and frantic. He was barking orders into his phone, commanding his staff to prep documents for an urgent meeting with a VIP client. Seeing his flustered state, I merely offered a faint smirk, probably just another excuse to run off to his mistress. Hunter stepped into the foyer. Out of habit, he kicked off his polished Oxford shoes and scanned the floor for his indoor slippers. They were a pair of worn-out, fuzzy moccasins, the heels completely crushed, which he loved wearing because they were soft. Usually, I placed them perfectly aligned on the shoe rack by the door for his convenience. Today, that spot was empty. Hunter frowned, glaring at me, and snapped, "Where are my slippers? Why didn't you put them out?" I slowly closed my book, stood up gracefully, and walked toward the shoe closet. I bent down not to retrieve the slippers to hand to him like a servant, but to pick up a black trash bag that contained those very moccasins. I walked right past Hunter, heading straight for the large garbage bin in the corner of the kitchen, and casually dropped the bag inside. My movement was swift, smooth, and decisive, leaving Hunter so stunned he couldn't react. He stared at me bug-eyed, then at the trash can, stuttering, "What the hell are you doing? Why did you throw my slippers away?" I turned, looking him dead in the eye, my voice eerily calm. "They were too old, torn, and ruined. You couldn't wear them anymore, so I threw them out. Why keep trash taking up space in the house, Hunter?" My words carried a heavy double meaning. Those worn-out slippers were exactly like our marriage. It was so eroded and torn apart that it was beyond salvaging. Its mere presence in this house was just an eyesore that brought me pain. Hunter seemed to catch the profound implication. Or perhaps the sudden rebellion of his usually docile, submissive wife bruised his massive ego. His face flushed a furious crimson. He pointed a finger at my face, screaming at the top of his lungs, accusing me of losing my mind, throwing out his things, and speaking to him with disrespect. He called me a useless leech who sat at home living off his money, playing power games. Those toxic words spewing from the mouth of the man I once loved so deeply sounded so bitter, so agonizing. But strangely, I didn't feel afraid or hurt like I used to. I stood there watching him scream like I was watching a cheap, boring clown show. The very last shred of respect I held for him was now sitting in the garbage bin along with his old slippers. I waited until he exhausted his tantrum, then replied softly, "Are you done? If you're done, then leave. Don't keep your partner waiting. As for those slippers, if you regret it, feel free to dig them out of the trash yourself. But I'm warning you, they're filthy now." With that, I turned my back and walked away, leaving Hunter frozen in pure shock. For the first time in our 20 years together, I dared to talk back, dared to throw away his belongings, and dared to walk away while he was speaking. That tiny taste of victory seeped into my veins, making me feel incredibly euphoric. I knew this was merely the prologue to the brutal divorce war ahead, but it was a crucial turning point marking my uprising. I would never let him trample me again. The old slippers had been trashed, and this marriage was approaching its absolute end. After the slipper incident, the tension in the house escalated to an unbearable, suffocating level. Hunter seemed to sense the dangerous shift in me, so he stayed away even more, using work as an excuse to disappear for days. That only gave me the perfect cover to execute my master plan. Like a diligent worker bee, I silently and meticulously prepared every single step for the most historic exit of my life. The following morning, I dressed sharply and took an Uber to my lawyer's office again. This time, I brought every notarized document, bank statement, trust file, deed, and the explosive dossier of infidelity evidence I had gathered. The senior attorney greeted me with professional warmth. He scrutinized every document, nodding in immense satisfaction. He told me that my position was incredibly advantageous because I legally controlled the lion's share of the assets, and I had undeniable proof of my husband's fault. We sat down and hammered out the exact terms of the divorce filing. "I'm filing for a contested divorce," I told the lawyer. "I know for a fact Hunter will never sign a mutual agreement. His ego is too massive. He will never accept being dumped by his wife, let alone splitting his wealth or losing control of his company. So, I need everything done with airtight precision and total surprise. I want to back him into a corner where the deed is already done before he even realizes what's happening." The lawyer advised me to legally liquidate and secure my private assets before filing the papers to avoid a messy, prolonged legal injunction. Taking his advice, I immediately contacted a high-end real estate broker to list the luxury Chicago penthouse, which was titled solely in my name. I also quietly initiated the transfer process for the majority shares of the company I held. This was a bold, highly risky move, but I had to do it. I'd rather sell them at a discount to a stranger than let my life's work fall into the hands of a traitor and his shameless mistress. For the next few weeks, I lived in a state of frantic busyness, anxiety, and adrenaline. During the day, while Hunter was out, I ran around signing paperwork, meeting potential buyers, and dealing with bankers. I had to put on an Oscar-worthy performance for the housekeeper and the affluent neighbors, maintaining a perfectly serene face as if nothing was wrong. Whenever a strange number called, I had to sneak out to the terrace, my heart pounding, terrified of being caught. At night, lying next to Hunter, listening to his steady snoring, I felt physically repulsed. I curled up on the absolute edge of the mattress, avoiding even accidental contact. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, contemplating my future. Getting divorced in your late 40s is a massive shock, not just to me, but to my family and social circles. I knew I would face gossip, pitying looks, and whispers. But I wasn't afraid. The freedom and peace of mind I craved were worth any price. I had also quietly secured a safe haven. I contacted an old friend in Asheville, North Carolina, and asked her to help me rent a small, quiet wooden cabin with a garden where I could grow flowers and paint. I had amassed a significant pile of cash from liquidating my jewelry and emptying my private savings, giving me a solid retirement fund. When I left this house, I wanted to be totally independent, never having to ask anyone for a dime again. Everything was tracking perfectly with the plan. The divorce papers were drafted, just waiting for my signature to be filed with the court. A buyer had put down a massive cash deposit on the penthouse. The corporate shares were in the final stages of negotiation with a buyer. I felt like a general silently moving my troops, preparing for the final, decisive battle. Sometimes, seeing Hunter ignorantly enjoying his life, partying, and barking orders at home, I actually felt a pang of pity for him. He was standing at the absolute pinnacle of wealth and status, completely unaware that the foundation beneath his feet was crumbling into dust. He was about to lose everything: his family, his career, his pride, and he had no idea. That was the price for his betrayal and ruthless apathy. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Hunter," I whispered to myself. "Your downfall is right around the corner." I was going to leave, but I was going to leave with my head held high, delivering a lesson he would never, ever forget. With the heavy legal legwork out of the way, I began purging the remnants of this hollow, glamorous marriage. The first thing on the agenda was the mountain of luxury designer goods Hunter had hoarded in the house for years. The authentic leather handbags, the crystal-encrusted heels, the breathtaking gowns I had once preserved with such care now, looking at them only evoked memories of fake affection and misery. I decided I wasn't taking a single item associated with this era of my life. I wanted to leave light and unburdened, without any dust from this life clinging to me. I called a famous luxury consignment boutique in the city. The chic female owner arrived, and upon seeing my massive collection, couldn't hide her awe. She delicately handled every Chanel and Hermes piece like a treasure, praising me for keeping them in pristine, unboxed condition. I just offered a tight smile, saying I rarely used them and kept them mostly for display. She had no idea that behind that glamour was the profound isolation of a wife turned into a shiny ornament. The negotiations were swift. I didn't haggle over pennies. I just wanted them gone. The cash payout from liquidating the wardrobe was well over $100,000. Holding that thick stack of cashier's checks, I felt no joy, only a bitter sting. Was this the monetary value of my youth? Was this the compensation for decades of blood, sweat, and tears? It felt cheap and meaningless. I divided the money into 3 parts. One part went into my private savings as a safety net. Another portion I wired to my parents back home. Though I knew they were financially comfortable, I wanted them to know their daughter was okay. The largest portion, I decided, would go to charity. I drove out to a specialized foster care facility and women's shelter in the Chicago suburbs. Seeing the bright, innocent eyes of the children when they received the toys, clothes, and donations I brought warmed my frozen heart. I realized that true happiness wasn't hoarding money or Birkin bags. It was sharing and giving. These children lacked parental love, yet they were so optimistic and full of life. Meanwhile, I had every material comfort, but my soul was barren and dying. Their smiles watered my withered spirit, restoring my faith in humanity. I returned home as dusk settled. The master bedroom felt bizarrely empty with the closets half bare. But strangely, the room felt lighter, more breathable. I felt like I had just shed a heavy suit of armor I had been dragging around for decades. Those luxury items were gone, taking Hunter's lies and vanity with them. Now, all that was left was me, simple, unadorned, but genuine and free. I sat by the window, looking out into the quiet night garden. Tomorrow would be another massive day. I had to finalize the sale of this penthouse and execute the transfer of the company's shares. Every step had to be calculated and flawless. I couldn't afford a single misstep. I closed my eyes, inhaling the deep scent of the night air. "Just hang on, Maya," I told myself. "Just a little longer and you'll be free." The luxury penthouse overlooking the Chicago skyline was our most valuable asset and held the most memories. Because it was purchased primarily with funds gifted by my parents and my own savings from our startup days, the deed was legally solely in my name. Hunter, out of sheer ego and blind trust in his obedient wife, never demanded his name beyond the title. That was his fatal mistake. I had listed the property off-market through an elite broker, demanding absolute discretion. Given its prime location and stunning interior, it only took a few days to find a buyer. It was a retired university professor and his wife, looking for a quiet, luxurious space to enjoy their golden years. They came for a viewing one morning while Hunter was at the office. Watching the elderly couple support each other as they walked, their eyes filled with deep affection and mutual respect, I felt a twinge of heartbreak, but also profound admiration. The husband gently asked his wife if she was tired, if she loved the space. The wife smiled warmly, complimenting the home's good energy and elegant decor. They had no idea that the warmth was merely a facade, masking the icy corpse of a dead marriage. I hosted them with total sincerity. I brewed Earl Grey tea and told them stories about every little corner of the house, the bougainvillea I planted on the balcony, the custom kitchen I designed for optimal cooking. The couple nodded happily and made a full cash offer that very afternoon. They said they felt a connection to the home and believed they would spend their final, happy years here. The closing took place swiftly at the title company. Holding the signed contract and the massive wire transfer confirmation, I exhaled. It was done. This house belonged to someone else now. The joys and sorrows trapped within these four walls were sealed away, making room for the genuine happiness of that sweet, elderly couple. I believed they would bring actual warmth to this place, something Hunter and I had failed to do. As per our agreement, I asked the buyers for one more week to pack my things and move out. They happily agreed, telling me to take my time. 1 week was more than enough to execute the final act of this play. That evening, Hunter came home earlier than usual. He seemed to be in high spirits, whistling a tune through the halls. Probably just had a great time with his little mistress. He walked into the living room, noticed a fresh vase of flowers I had arranged, and threw out a lazy compliment. He was entirely, blissfully ignorant that the roof over his head, the floor beneath his designer shoes, no longer belonged to him. He was standing in a stranger's house, acting like the king of his castle. I watched him sprawl across the sofa, turning on the massive OLED TV, and felt a surge of pity mixed with vindictive satisfaction. He was living in a delusion of power and wealth, completely oblivious that he was dancing on the edge of a cliff. When the truth dropped, the shock would absolutely decimate his towering ego. But that was the price he had to pay. I felt no guilt anymore. I turned and walked into the kitchen to prep dinner, my very last dinner in this house. Selling the house was huge, but the final, fatal strike I had reserved for Hunter was the transfer of the company's shares. This tech firm was his life's work, the thing he valued more than his own life. He constantly boasted about holding the power of life and death as the almighty CEO and chairman of the board. But he conveniently forgot a crucial detail. The shares he personally held did not constitute a majority. The bulk of the controlling shares belonged to me, thanks to my parents' seed money, with the rest scattered among minor investors. The person I chose to sell my entire stake to was Thomas. Thomas was Hunter's childhood best friend and college roommate. They co-founded the startup together. But as the company began pulling in massive profits, Hunter, driven by greed and selfishness, used underhanded tactics to force Thomas out of the executive board, stealing his credit and throwing him onto the street with nothing. Thomas had swallowed that bitter pill, rebuilt his life from scratch, and became Hunter's fiercest rival in the industry. I knew Thomas had been plotting his revenge for years, waiting for the chance to exact justice. I was going to hand him the opportunity of a lifetime. I met Thomas at a highly discreet, upscale restaurant. When he saw me, he couldn't hide his shock. He asked why I wanted to sell my shares to him, my husband's sworn enemy. I looked him dead in the eye and said firmly, "I'm not selling for the money. I'm selling for justice. Hunter betrayed me, just like he betrayed you years ago. I want you to step in and teach him a lesson about karma." Thomas stared at me in silence for a long moment, then gave a heavy nod. He understood my agony just as I understood his profound resentment. The negotiation was astonishingly quick. I agreed to sell him my entire 40% stake at a steep discount below market value. I didn't care about maximizing profit. I cared about maximizing Hunter's destruction. Thomas swore to keep the deal absolutely classified until the very last second at the upcoming emergency shareholder meeting. That was when he would proudly walk into the boardroom as the largest shareholder and legally dethrone Hunter from his CEO chair, gripping the luxury pen to sign the transfer documents. My hand didn't shake. It was rock solid. My signature today was the execution order for Hunter's illustrious career. I pictured his stunned, horrified face when he realized his wife had sold him out, handing his empire over to his worst enemy. It would undeniably be the most unforgettable moment of his life. After signing, Thomas firmly shook my hand. "Thank you, Maya. You've helped lift a burden I've carried for 5 years. I promise to run the company well and honor your trust." I offered a gentle smile. "I believe in you, Thomas. Do what you have to do. As for me, I just want to find my own peace." Stepping out of the restaurant, I looked up at the vast Chicago sky. The wind whipped my hair, but my mind was as still as a calm lake. It was finished. All preparations were complete. I had severed every tie binding me to Hunter, emotional and financial. Now, I just had to wait for Judgment Day. I would slip away quietly, leaving behind a catastrophic hurricane that would crash down on the trader's head. My final day in the penthouse passed with an eerie, profound silence. I woke up at dawn, taking a final stroll through the terrace garden, hand-watering the orchids I had meticulously cultivated for years. I caressed their leaves, whispering my goodbyes. Tomorrow, the new owners would take over. I hoped they would love them as I had. I dragged my single rolling suitcase into the foyer. Inside were just a few simple outfits, my battered art supplies, and a framed photo of my parents. I took absolutely nothing that reminded me of Hunter or the opulent, toxic life I had lived here. I left the house keys, the keys to the Mercedes, and my diamond wedding band on the kitchen island, the very first place Hunter would look when he walked in. That smooth, platinum band used to be the ultimate proof of a lifelong vow. Now, it sat cold and lifeless on the quartz countertop, a definitive period at the end of a tragic love story. I called an Uber. As the car pulled up to the gate, I looked back at the house one last time. The majestic, multi-million-dollar penthouse in the sky. A dream for millions, and once my greatest pride. Now, in my eyes, it was nothing but a graveyard that had buried my youth and happiness. I felt no regret. I only felt immense relief, like a crushing weight had vanished. I got into the car, slamming the door shut, permanently blocking out the old world behind me. The Uber driver was a jovial, middle-aged man. Seeing me traveling alone with a small suitcase, he sparked up a conversation. "Going on a vacation or a long business trip, ma'am?" I smiled softly. "I'm going to find myself." The driver chuckled heartily. "Well, that sounds awfully philosophical. Are you an artist? Well, whatever it is, safe travels, and I hope you find what you're looking for." A stranger's simple blessing made my heart swell with warmth. It turned out the world was still full of kind, decent people. Not everyone was as treacherous as the man who shared my bed. The car merged onto the interstate, leaving the loud, chaotic skyline of Chicago behind. The towering skyscrapers and jammed traffic faded into the rearview mirror, replaced by wide-open highways. I rolled the window down, letting the cool wind whip through my hair. I breathed in deeply. It smelled like freedom. It smelled like undiscovered territories calling my name. At O'Hare Airport, I bought a one-way ticket to Asheville, North Carolina. As I waited at the gate, I took out my phone, popped out the SIM card, and dropped it into a trash can. From this moment on, nobody named Maya, the CEO's wife, existed. There was only Maya the artist, Maya of freedom and peace. The plane took off, climbing above the clouds, leaving the dirt and noise of the metropolis below. I looked out the window, visualizing the Blue Ridge Mountains, the foggy, dreamy city I had visited once in college and had fallen in love with for its crisp air and melancholic beauty. I was going to restart my life there. I would live in a wooden cabin, plant hydrangeas, and paint whatever my heart desired. As dusk fell, painting the horizon in strokes of burning orange and deep purple, I leaned my head against the glass and closed my eyes. In my light sleep, I dreamt I was standing in a pine forest, the wind singing, birds chirping, and the bright sun thawing my frozen heart. Goodbye, painful past. Goodbye, Hunter, the man I once loved more than life itself. I am leaving to find my lost smile, to live a life truly worth living. Hunter's point of view. Today was an absolutely spectacular day. The massive contract with the European tech firm had been signed without a hitch, guaranteeing astronomical profits for the company by the fourth quarter. I strode out of the boardroom to the thunderous applause of my executives and the reverent gazes of our partners. The sensation of standing at the absolute zenith of success, gripping limitless power and wealth, was intensely intoxicating. I treated myself to a lavish celebratory dinner with my inner circle of executives, and of course, Tiffany, my scorching hot mistress who always knew exactly how to please me. We took over the VIP room at the city's most exclusive steakhouse. Expensive scotch flowed freely. The smooth jazz and the sycophantic praise from my subordinates made me feel like a god. Tiffany pressed herself against my chest, pouting her lips, whispering lethal, sugary nothings into my ear. I looked down at her in her skin-tight designer dress, flaunting her curves, and felt a surge of massive pride. A titan of industry like me deserved a vibrant, stunning trophy like her by my side, not that aging, ugly hag waiting at home who spent her days rotting in the kitchen, smelling of grease. Thinking of Maya, it suddenly dawned on me that I hadn't eaten dinner at home in a week. She was probably throwing one of her silent tantrums. Women are the masters of overthinking and playing the victim. But I knew my wife better than anyone. All I had to do was go home, say a few sweet words, or toss a stack of cash at her, and she'd be smiling like a fool again. I smirked internally. I had her completely under my thumb, which gave me the absolute freedom to conquer the world outside. Whenever I got tired, I could just return to my safe, boring harbor to rest. As the dinner wrapped up, my buddies tried to drag me to a high-end club for round two, but I declined. Tonight, I actually wanted to go home a little early to rub the news of this massive contract in Maya's face, and maybe pacify her so she'd stop being annoying. After all, she was the loyal wife who stuck with me when I was a broke nobody. I didn't want her to be too miserable. I pulled out my iPhone and dialed her number, intending to order her to make me a hot bowl of chicken noodle soup for my hangover, my favorite comfort food. But the phone just rang and rang. I frowned in irritation. Normally, Maya pounced on the phone after the first ring, her voice always submissive. "Yes, honey, I'm here." Who gave her the nerve to ignore her husband's call today? I called a second time. A third time. Just endless, echoing rings before kicking over to voicemail. Rage flared up inside me, fueled by the alcohol, making me insanely agitated. She's playing games, turning off her phone to scare me. Fine. Let's see how long you can keep this up. I angrily shoved the phone into my pocket and flagged down my private driver. Sitting in the back of the Maybach, I rehearsed the explosive lecture I was going to give Maya the second I walked in, to permanently cure her of this ignoring my calls habit. I'd throw my massive bonus check right in her face. That would blind her and instantly cure her tantrum. Money is the ultimate cure-all. It buys anything, including a woman's obedience. The car glided through the glittering downtown streets. I leaned back into the plush leather, closing my eyes, daydreaming about my glorious future. The company was exploding. Money was pouring in like a river. I'd buy another mansion, a new Ferrari, and take Tiffany on a world tour. As for Maya, she could just stay home, manage the house, and cook. I considered my life perfectly optimized. I had a domestic servant keeping the house, and a gorgeous mistress keeping me entertained. I chuckled at my own brilliance, completely oblivious to the catastrophic hurricane waiting for me right behind my front door. The Maybach pulled up to my ultra-exclusive high-rise. I stumbled out, the scotch still clouding my brain, but my irritation at Maya remained sharp. I waved the driver off and confidently strode up to the private elevator that opened directly into my penthouse. I swiped my key fob. The elevator doors chimed and opened. I stepped out into the foyer, fully expecting the usual layout. But the lights were off. What the hell is this? It's barely 9 p.m., and she's dead asleep? I muttered, cursing under my breath. I fumbled for my house keys and jammed one into the deadbolt of the heavy oak door. Click! It wouldn't turn. I yanked it out, grunting, and shoved it back in, twisting it with all my might until I broke a sweat, but it was jammed solid. I pulled out my phone and used the flashlight to inspect the key. It was definitely my house key. Why the hell wasn't it working? Losing all patience, I started pounding on the heavy door with my fists, shouting, "Maya, open the damn door." What kind of stunt is this, changing the locks? Are you trying to lock your husband out? After a minute of violent banging, the lights inside flicked on. I let out a breath, thinking the crazy bitch had finally gotten out of bed. I adjusted my collar, readying a devastating verbal assault. The heavy door slowly swung inward. I lunged forward to scream in Maya's face, but the words choked in my throat. The person standing in front of me wasn't Maya. It was a strange man in his late 60s, wearing reading glasses and a striped pajama set, glaring at me with a mix of bewilderment and severe annoyance. Behind him, a strange woman peeked out, looking highly alarmed. I froze, eyes wide, jaw slacked, brain short-circuiting. Was I so drunk I went to the wrong floor? I stumbled back and looked at the brass plaque on the wall. Penthouse 4501. This was my house. "Sir, who are you looking for?" Banging on doors in the middle of the night, the older man demanded, his voice laced with suspicion. I stammered, pointing a finger at my own chest. I'm Hunter. I own this penthouse. Who are you people? Why are you in my house? Where is my wife?" The man looked me up and down like I was a lunatic, then shook his head in disgust. "Are you drunk or just lost? I just bought this property. Sign the papers. We moved in a few days ago. The previous owner was a woman named Maya. She sold it to us. Now, go sleep it off somewhere else before I call the cops." His words hit me like a bucket of ice water, instantly sobering me up. Sold the house? Maya sold the house? What kind of insane nightmare is this? This penthouse was our most valuable asset. How could she legally sell it without my consent? I screamed. "Impossible. This is my house." My wife's name is Maya, but she can't sell it. You're lying to me. I tried to push past him into the foyer to check, but the old man was faster. He slammed the heavy oak door right in my face, and I heard the deadbolt click shut. The metallic clack echoed like the sound of my every hope being sealed inside a coffin. I stood paralyzed in the hallway, my head spinning in absolute chaos. I yanked out my phone and frantically dialed Maya's number. The number you have reached is no longer in service. I called my mother-in-law. I called Maya's friends. Nobody knew where she was. Panic pure, unadulterated terror began to claw its way into my veins. For the first time in my life, I felt genuine, paralyzing fear. Maya, the docile, spineless woman I had treated like dirt, assuming she would never dare leave me, had secretly sold our multi-million-dollar home and vanished without a single trace. Where did she go? What else had she done behind my back? I slumped against the cold marble wall of the hallway. The air conditioning blasted over me, but it wasn't as freezing as the absolute terror gripping my heart. I stared at the closed door of the penthouse, where strangers were now living, and felt a wave of crushing, bitter bile rise in my throat. I had been kicked out of my own castle. I was homeless, standing right on the property I used to rule. My arrogance from just an hour ago had evaporated, replaced by shock and supreme dread. Maya, where are you? What have you done to me? I sat shell-shocked on the cold marble floor of the corridor. The recessed lighting cast a pathetic, mocking shadow of me against the wall. I still couldn't process what had just happened. This house was my blood and sweat, my ultimate status symbol. How could it change hands in the blink of an eye like some sick, twisted joke? The heavy oak door remained shut, mocking my rapidly depleting sanity. Inside, I could hear the faint sound of a television. It was the sound of another family enjoying the warmth of a space that was supposed to be mine. Jealousy and rage ignited like a wildfire in my chest. I leaped up and threw myself at the door, pounding furiously again. I screamed Maya's name. I cursed at the old man. I demanded my justice. But answering my psychotic rage was the sound of the elevator dinging open. Two massive building security guards stepped out, tasers on their hips, shining blinding flashlights directly into my eyes. One of the guards recognized me and lowered his voice cautiously. "Mr. Hunter, please calm down. This is a luxury residence. You're disturbing the peace." I grabbed the guard's lapels, my voice cracking with hysteria. "How the hell are you doing your job? Why did you let strangers break into my house? Where's my wife?" The guard gently but firmly peeled my hands off him, looking at me with deep pity, and said slowly, "Sir, Miss Maya finalized the sale and moved out yesterday. We personally assisted her with loading her luggage into the car. The new owners have legally verified deeds. We cannot intervene, sir. You need to leave the premises." The guard's confirmation was the final hammer blow, shattering the last microscopic sliver of hope I had. So, it was real. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't hallucinating. Maya had actually sold the penthouse. My meek, kitchen-bound wife had pulled off a heist of epic proportions right under my nose. I let my arms drop, feeling as if every ounce of strength had been drained from my bones. A crushing, suffocating humiliation washed over me as the adjacent penthouse doors cracked open, wealthy neighbors peering out to whisper and point at the spectacle. I hung my head and did the walk of shame to the elevator, escorted by security. Outside, my Maybach was gone. I hailed a cab, sitting in the back like a fugitive. I didn't know where to go in this massive city. My home was gone. My wife was gone. I was suddenly an orphan in the world. I had the driver drop me off near my office. I stumbled out and sat on a bench on the Chicago Riverwalk, burying my head in my hands. Images of Maya flooded my mind. Maya with her warm smile. Maya with her hot dinners waiting for me. Maya with her calloused hands from working to support me. Why did you do this to me, Maya? Why didn't you give me a chance to explain, a chance to fix it? The screams in my head shattered into pathetic, choking sobs. For the first time since my grueling startup days, the ruthless, iron-willed CEO was crying. I checked into a nearby Ritz-Carlton for the night, but the five-star luxury did nothing to quell the acid churning in my gut. I threw myself onto the king bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. I didn't sleep a wink. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of that locked door and the old man's scowl haunted me. I shot up in bed, grabbing my laptop, and logged into our joint banking portal. My heart stopped. The balance on our primary accounts was a few $1,000s. Millions of dollars, our entire liquid net worth built over decades, had vanished into thin air. I frantically checked the transaction history. Over the last week, massive wire transfers had drained the accounts, sending the funds to untraceable offshore accounts and cashier's checks. Cold sweat drenched my forehead. I didn't just care about the money. I could make money. What terrified me was the surgical, icy precision with which Maya had executed this. She had mapped out every single move perfectly. The woman I thought was a naive idiot was actually a terrifying, dormant mastermind. I started racking my brain, trying to figure out what was left in my name. The Maybach? Company leased. The suburban commercial land? Maya's name. The rental properties? Maya's name. Oh God. I realized with absolute horror that because of my arrogant trust and my desire to keep her oblivious and happy while I cheated, I had allowed her to hold the deeds to practically everything. Now that she had flipped the board, I was legally broke. I sat gripping my hair in the dark hotel room. The crushing weight of catastrophic regret began to gnaw at my soul. If only I hadn't been so obsessed with superficial thrills. If only I had paid attention to her. If only I hadn't been so arrogant. But life doesn't hand out if-onlys. I had smashed my own life to pieces, and now I was bleeding on the shards. I thought of Tiffany, my sweet little mistress who constantly purred that she loved me for me, not my wealth. Would she comfort me now? Would she stay by my side? Or abandon me like everyone else? I almost called her, but stopped. A man's ego wouldn't let me crawl to my mistress looking weak and defeated. I had to fix this mess myself. Tomorrow, I would go to the company. The company was my fortress. I had absolute power there. As long as the business survived, I could rebuild everything. I tried to comfort myself with that thought, but deep down, a malignant tumor of dread was growing. The next morning, I arrived at the corporate headquarters looking haggard, with dark bags under my eyes from sleep deprivation. I tried to pull myself together, adjusting my Tom Ford suit to maintain the terrifying aura of the CEO. But the second I stepped into the lobby, I sensed a bizarre, heavy atmosphere. Employees stared at me with calculating, suspicious eyes, whispering among themselves and quickly looking away. No one rushed to greet me. No one offered their usual, terrified respect. I marched into my executive suite and slammed the door. My veteran executive assistant knocked timidly and entered, placing a massive legal binder on my desk. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Mr. Hunter, corporate counsel is waiting for you in the boardroom. The board of directors has convened an emergency meeting for 9 a.m. I scowled, my temper flaring. What the hell kind of meeting? Why wasn't I briefed on the agenda? She stared at her shoes, refusing to meet my eyes. "Sir, I don't know all the details, but there's been a massive restructuring of the shareholder equity." My gut plummeted. I grabbed the binder and sprinted down the hall to the boardroom. I threw the glass doors open, and the sight before me knocked the wind out of my lungs. Sitting at the head of the table in my chair was Thomas. Thomas, the co-founder I had ruthlessly purged from this very room 5 years ago. Why the hell was he here? How dare he sit in my seat? I glared at him and roared. What kind of sick joke is this? Security, drag this trespasser out of my building. Nobody moved. The board members sat in dead silence, staring at the mahogany table. The company's lead counsel stood up, adjusted his glasses, and said calmly, "Mr. Hunter, please control yourself. Mr. Thomas is currently the majority shareholder of this corporation, holding exactly 51% of the voting stock. He has the absolute legal right to convene this meeting and occupy that chair." I felt like I had been struck by lightning. 51%? Where the hell did he get that? I owned 15%. My wife, Maya, owned 40%. The rest was public and minor investors. How could Thomas? A horrifying realization exploded in my brain, making my knees buckle. Maya. It was Maya. Thomas looked at me with cold, piercing eyes dripping with mockery. He spoke slowly, twisting the knife. "You guessed it, Hunter. Maya transferred her entire equity stake to me. For an incredibly generous price, I might add. She asked me to pass along a message. This is her final gift to you, so you can finally understand what it feels like to be stabbed in the back by the person you trusted most." I went completely numb. The roaring in my ears drowned out the room. It was over. Maya had delivered the killing blow. She didn't just strip my personal wealth. She annihilated my career, my legacy, my ultimate pride. She had allied with my greatest enemy to back me off a cliff. I looked around the room at the faces of my subordinates. They were looking at me with pity, or worse, suppressed glee. I was a wounded animal thrown into a pit of starving wolves. Thomas stood up and declared loudly, effective immediately, "I am assuming the role of chairman of the board and chief executive officer. Hunter, you are officially terminated for cause. You have until the end of the day to vacate the premises." I couldn't speak. My throat was dry as sandpaper. I turned and stumbled out of the boardroom, my feet feeling like they were encased in concrete. The long, sleek corporate hallway stretched out like the dark, endless abyss of my future. I had lost everything. The penthouse, the millions, the company, my status, and my family all popped like a soap bubble. I locked myself in the executive bathroom, splashing freezing water on my face. I stared at my gaunt reflection and didn't even recognize myself. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Tiffany. I lunged for it, praying for one last shred of comfort. But her brief text was the final blade slicing through my bleeding heart. "Hey Hunter, word is you just went bankrupt and got fired." "Yeah, we're done. I don't do broke guys. Good luck with everything." I burst into manic, psychotic laughter in the empty, echoing bathroom. The hysterical laughter mixed with the sound of running water, sounding hauntingly pathetic. So this was the reality of human loyalty. When I was rich, they swarmed me, licking my boots. The second I fell, they discarded me like trash. Only Maya, the wife I had treated like garbage, was the only one who had ever loved me purely. But I had personally destroyed her. I walked out of the bathroom, my face dripping wet, my brain burning with a feverish intensity. The world was spinning. I dragged myself back to my office to pack my personal belongings into a cardboard box under the watchful eye of HR. This massive, luxurious corner office, which I treated as my royal throne, now felt like a freezing prison cell. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out a framed photo of Maya and me from our wedding day. In the picture, I was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting rented tuxedo, and Maya wore a simple, unbranded white dress. But our smiles were brilliant, radiant with hope. I used to treasure this photo during the hard years, but when the millions started rolling in, I shoved it face down in a drawer to make room for Forbes magazines and photos with politicians. Now, as everyone abandoned me, this cheap photo was the only thing left, a silent witness to my ultimate betrayal. I dropped the photo into the cardboard box. A sharp knock on the door. Thomas walked in with 2 armed security guards and the corporate lawyer. He looked at me with a mix of pity and disgust, stating coldly, "Hunter, per company policy, the Maybach and your corporate black card are property of the enterprise. Leave the keys and the card on the desk before you are escorted out." I glared at Thomas, choking on my own rage. I had driven that car for years. I treated it as an extension of my own body. Now, he was taking that too? I wanted to scream, to punch him, but I stopped. What right did I have to fight back? I was the loser. I was a beggar. I pulled the keys and my wallet out, slamming them onto the desk. "Take it. Take it all." I spat. "Congratulations on stealing everything I built." Thomas didn't get angry. He just smirked and replied, "You're wrong, Hunter. I didn't steal a damn thing from you. I just took back what you owed me, and what you owed the universe. Everything you lost today, you threw it away with your own 2 hands." His words pierced my soul, leaving me agonizingly speechless. I picked up my cardboard box and did the walk of shame out of the skyscraper where I was once king. In the grand lobby, former employees gathered in clusters, pointing and whispering. No one bowed. No one rushed to open the door. Just morbid curiosity and muffled laughter. I kept my head down, power walking out onto the Chicago streets. The brutal midday sun blinded me. No Maybach. No private driver. I stood abandoned, amidst the roaring city traffic. I hailed a cab to the hotel where I left my bags. Sitting in the back, I checked my personal wallet. I had exactly $300 in cash left, whatever survived my extravagant bar tab from the night before. My credit cards were either canceled or maxed. My joint accounts were zeroed out. I was functionally destitute. Back at the Ritz, the receptionist looked at me awkwardly. "Sir, your credit card on file has been declined. You will need to settle your balance in cash to retrieve your bags." I emptied my wallet to pay the exorbitant room rate, leaving me with $50 to my name. I dragged my suitcase out of the 5-star hotel, wandering aimlessly on the scorching pavement. My stomach roared with hunger. I hadn't eaten since yesterday. I stopped at a greasy street cart and bought a cheap hot dog. Eating that lukewarm, processed meat reminded me of the steaming, exquisite beef bourguignon I had thrown on the floor. Hot tears stung my eyes. I had trashed a meal made of pure love, only to end up chewing on the bitter grit of isolation. I sat on a park bench, staring at the crowds. I didn't know where to go. I had no home, no money. Suddenly, I thought of Tiffany. Even though she texted me to break up, I refused to believe she was that heartless. We had shared so many passionate nights. I had bought her a luxury condo, a Range Rover, designer clothes. Surely, that meant something more than money. I convinced myself she was just panicking. I had to see her face to face. I dragged my suitcase onto the L train and headed to the luxury high-rise I had bought for her. I rang the doorbell, heart pounding. A moment later, the doors swung open, but it wasn't Tiffany. It was a massive, heavily tattooed man in a tank top. He glared at me. "Who the hell are you?" I stammered. "I'm looking for Tiffany. This is her apartment." The guy smirked, turning over his shoulder. "Hey babe, some old dude is here for you." Tiffany strolled to the door, wearing the silk slip dress I had bought her, her makeup flawless. Seeing me, she didn't look shocked or embarrassed. Instead, she looked at me with unfiltered disgust. She crossed her arms, leaning against the tattooed guy, and sneered. "Oh wow. If it isn't Chairman Hunter, I thought I texted you. What are you doing here, beggar?" I was paralyzed. Was this the sweet, innocent girl who used to pout and kiss my neck? How could she be so vile? My voice shook. "Tiffany, what are you saying? I bought this place for you. I bought your car. How can you treat me like this?" Tiffany burst out laughing, a shrill, manic sound. "You bought it from me, which means it's mine. Is there a law saying I can't date a real man now that you're totally broke? You're old, and now you're poor. Who the hell would want you? Look at yourself. You look worse than a homeless bum." The tattooed man stepped forward, shoving me hard in the chest. I stumbled backward, almost tripping over my suitcase. He growled, "Get lost before I break your jaw." The door slammed in my face. I stood in the hallway, hearing their muffled laughter through the wood, and a wave of pure, unadulterated hatred and nausea washed over me. I trudged toward the stairwell, too ashamed to let anyone see my pathetic state in the elevator. Every step down felt like descending into hell. I had truly lost it all: my wealth, my status, and the final delusion of my midlife crisis romance. Tiffany was a parasite. When the host ran out of blood, she detached and found a new victim. I thought of Maya. Maya never demanded a single expensive gift. She saved every penny for us. She was there when I had nothing, and she was waiting for me every night, no matter how cruelly I treated her. The comparison was 1,000 daggers in my chest. I had traded a priceless diamond for a piece of shiny, worthless glass. I was the stupidest man on the face of the earth. I walked out of the building just as a massive summer thunderstorm broke over Chicago. The rain lashed down like a punishment from God. I didn't seek shelter. I dragged my suitcase through the deluge. The freezing rain soaked me to the bone, but it was nothing compared to the coldness of human betrayal. I walked and laughed like a lunatic, tears and rain mixing on my face. Karma is here, Hunter. You sowed the wind, and now you reap the whirlwind. Night fell. The city lit up in a neon blaze. But to me, it was a dark, terrifying labyrinth. I was soaking wet, freezing, and starving. My $50 was gone. I couldn't call my parents or my siblings back in my hometown. The shame of my total ruin was too agonizing. I couldn't call my former friends, who were undoubtedly drinking champagne and laughing at my downfall. I wandered like a ghost through the affluent neighborhoods where I used to dine as a VIP. Looking through the glass windows at people laughing and eating made my stomach cramp violently. All of that belonged to a universe I was permanently exiled from. My exhausted legs carried me to a dark corner of Millennium Park. I found an isolated bench, shielded from the wind, and curled up into a ball. The freezing night air and the hollow gnawing in my stomach kept me awake. I remembered my custom-made California King mattress in the penthouse, and the lavender essential oils Maya used to diffuse to help me sleep. Now, my only companion was a hard wooden bench and the distant wail of police sirens. Suddenly, I saw a young, impoverished family walking through the park. The husband was pushing a rusted bicycle. The wife was carrying a sleeping toddler. They were dressed in cheap, worn-out clothes, but their faces glowed with happiness. The husband asked gently, "Are you tired, honey? Let me carry him." The wife smiled and shook her head. "I'm okay. We sold all our goods early today. Let's buy some cheap ground beef and make tacos for dinner." Their laughter faded into the night, leaving behind a burning, desperate envy in my chest. That was exactly what Maya and I used to be. The days we shared 9-9 cent mac and cheese. The days I drove her around in my beat-up Civic, our hearts overflowing with optimism. I had possessed the most beautiful, authentic happiness a man could ask for, and I crushed it with my own hands to chase a shallow, toxic illusion. I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably into the dark void of the park. The agonized weeping of a broken, middle-aged man echoed through the trees. I cried for my monumental stupidity, cried from a suffocating longing for Maya, and cried for the horrific price I was paying. I whispered her name into the void. Maya. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Where are you? Please come back. I'm begging you. But the only answer was the wind rustling through the leaves, sounding like the heavy sigh of the universe. The next morning, I was violently shaken awake by a city sanitation worker. Hey buddy, get up. You can't sleep here. You're blocking the sweeper. I dragged my aching, battered body up. My head throbbed. I looked down at my ruined, mud-stained Tom Ford suit and scuffed Italian leather shoes. I looked exactly like a vagrant. Was this Hunter, the majestic, untouchable CEO? No. This was the physical manifestation of karma. And so began my life as a homeless drifter, begging for scraps on the streets of Chicago. I tasted every flavor of humiliation chased away, cursed at, beaten by other transients over a place to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, memories of Maya and our warm dinners tortured my rotting mind. I knew I didn't deserve forgiveness, but deep in my shattered soul, a microscopic sliver of hope remained that one day I would find Maya just to say I was sorry. Just one apology before I died in the gutter. Hunter's life from now on would be an endless, inescapable purgatory of regret. Asheville welcomed me with a misty morning and the crisp, refreshing chill unique to the Blue Ridge Mountains. I stood in front of my small, rustic wooden cabin, nestled deeply within a blooming garden of hydrangeas. The massive, globe-like turquoise flowers swayed in the gentle mountain breeze, as if greeting their new owner. This was the place I had chosen as my sanctuary for the rest of my life, far away from the noise, the smog, and the bleeding wounds of my past. The cabin was small, but immensely cozy. The dark hardwood floors radiated the faint, earthy scent of pine, and the large windows offered a breathtaking view of the Emerald Valley below. I immediately began nesting. I bought succulents for the windowsills, hung a few landscape paintings on the walls, and dedicated the brightest, sunniest corner of the living room to serve as my art studio. My life here flowed with a serene, deliberate slowness. I woke up early, brewed a pot of hot chamomile tea, and sat on the porch watching the sunrise over the pine-covered peaks, listening to the birds chirp in the new day. Afterward, I tended to my garden, pulling weeds and planting organic vegetables. By afternoon, I lost myself entirely at the easel, pouring my soul into brushstrokes and color palettes. There was no one rushing me, no one complaining, no agonizing over bills or corporate ladders. I lived like a quiet, peaceful chord in the grand symphony of the mountains. One day, while wandering around a quaint cafe near the French Broad River hunting for inspiration, I bumped into Professor Sullivan. He was my old university art professor, the man who had grieved the loss of my talent when I abandoned the art world to marry Hunter. Seeing him again after more than 20 years, he had aged significantly, his hair completely white, but his eyes were still sharp and his smile as warm as ever. We recognized each other and embraced joyfully. Professor Sullivan looked at me for a long time, then sighed softly. Maya, you've aged so much. Why do your eyes look so incredibly sad? I just offered a polite smile and didn't answer directly. We sat together, catching up. He told me he had moved to Asheville years ago to retire, and now ran a free art program for underprivileged kids. He asked if I was still painting. I nodded. I just picked up the brush again, Professor. But I'm terribly rusty. He encouraged me warmly. Don't be discouraged. Art never abandons a pure heart. As long as you paint with your soul, every canvas will be beautiful. His words were a match striking against the dry kindling of my spirit, reigniting a passion that had slept for decades. From that day on, he frequently visited my cabin, reviewing my work, critiquing my brushwork, and advising on color theory. Having him as a mentor and friend chased away the lingering shadows of isolation. He never pried into my marriage. I never complained or played the victim. We only spoke of art, flowers, and the majestic beauty of the North Carolina mountains. Beside him, I regained my confidence and the sheer joy of creation I thought I had lost forever. The autumn rains in Asheville were long and melancholic, the kind of weather that breeds nostalgia. I sat by the window, watching the white curtain of rain blanket the valley, holding a steaming mug of tea. My phone buzzed. A text from Chloe. I hadn't spoken to anyone from Chicago in a long time, not even Chloe, because I wanted a clean, surgical break from my past. But she occasionally texted to check on me. This time, the text was unusually long, and its contents made my heart skip a beat. Chloe wrote that Hunter was living in absolute squalor. After being ousted from the company and losing his entire fortune, he had fallen into massive debt and was actively being hunted by loan sharks. His mistress, Tiffany, had drained whatever cash he had in his pockets and vanished with a new guy. Hunter was now completely homeless, possessing no family and no friends, wandering the streets and sleeping under bridges. Chloe mentioned she had spotted him once digging through a dumpster behind a restaurant for food. He looked so emaciated, filthy, and broken that she almost didn't recognize him. Reading those words, a heavy silence settled over me. I always assumed I would feel a rush of euphoric vengeance when the traitor finally paid the price. But no. Right now, I felt nothing but a hollow emptiness and a vast, sweeping sadness. I didn't hate him anymore. The agony he inflicted on me had been healed by time and the tranquility of these mountains. Thinking of Hunter now, I only felt profound pity for a human being who lost his way, blinded by greed and lust, ultimately destroying his own soul and everything that actually mattered. I remembered the Hunter of 20 years ago, the poor, fiercely determined young man who held my hand and promised me the world. The Hunter of today was a tragedy of his own making, a brutal manifestation of karma. It was simply the universal law. You reap exactly what you sow. I texted Chloe back a brief reply. Thank you for letting me know. Everyone has their own destiny. He made his bed, and now he has to lie in it. I can't help him. I only hope he finds some sort of spiritual awakening. I set the phone down and looked outside. The rain was letting up. Weak rays of sunlight pierced the heavy gray clouds, illuminating my hydrangea garden. The raindrops clinging to the blue petals sparkled like diamonds. I realized that forgiveness isn't a gift you give to your abuser. It's a gift you give to yourself. Once I let go of the hatred, my soul achieved true liberation. Hunter was now just a stranger. His story had nothing to do with mine anymore. I drained my tea, savoring the sweet, earthy aftertaste, and stood up, walking back to my easel. An unfinished painting of a rainy afternoon was waiting for me. Time flew, and I had been living in Asheville for over 2 years. 2 years isn't an eternity, but it was enough to completely metamorphose me. I was no longer Maya, the invisible housewife. I was Maya, the mountain artist. My paintings were created from the most authentic, raw vibrations of a heart that had survived catastrophic trauma and found miraculous healing. Encouraged by Professor Sullivan and my new circle of local artists, I decided to host a small, intimate gallery exhibition at a friend's rustic coffee shop. The exhibition was titled Serenity. It featured exactly 20 of my favorite pieces created during my time here. Opening day was blessed with perfect weather, brilliant golden sunshine, and a crisp, cool autumn breeze. A massive crowd of tourists and locals came to view the gallery. They stood mesmerized in front of my canvases depicting foggy pine forests, winding dirt roads, wild roadside daisies, and the warm, glowing hearth of a simple kitchen. Many people told me that looking at my art made their chests feel lighter, filling them with an inexplicable sense of peace and stillness. One highly unexpected VIP guest showed up, moving me to tears. It was Thomas. Thomas had heard about my exhibition through Chloe and flew all the way from Chicago just to congratulate me. He looked sharp, distinguished, and much more grounded than the tech bro I remembered. He handed me a massive bouquet of lilies and shook my hand with deep respect. Congratulations, Maya. You really did find yourself again. Looking at these paintings, I see a profoundly beautiful and forgiving soul. I thanked him and asked about the company. Thomas smiled, saying the firm was thriving. Everything was back on track, and he was diverting a massive chunk of the profits into community outreach and charity, exactly as I had hoped. Thomas also gently revealed that he had secretly intervened to help Hunter just a tiny bit, to give him a chance to survive. He had arranged for Hunter to be hired as a night shift security guard at a remote logistics warehouse on the outskirts of Illinois, just so he wouldn't freeze or starve to death on the streets. I nodded, smiling in deep gratitude at Thomas's honorable mercy. It was the right thing to do. You fight the enemy when they attack, but you don't execute a man who has already surrendered to his fate. The exhibition was a staggering success. Almost every piece sold on opening day. I donated a large percentage of the proceeds to Professor Sullivan's charity art class, keeping just enough to sustain my simple life and buy more canvases. But infinitely more important than the money was the validation. I had reclaimed my worth. I was no longer someone's shadow. I was Maya. I was an artist. I was a free, intensely happy woman, standing in the center of the gallery, surrounded by flowers and genuine praise. I felt decades younger. My smile was radiant, my eyes sparkling with pure joy. I silently thanked the brutal storms of my past. I thanked Hunter's betrayal for pushing me to the absolute brink, giving me the desperate courage to break my chains and carve out my true destiny. One late autumn afternoon, I carried my easel up to the pine ridge behind my cabin. This was my secret sanctuary, where I had a panoramic view of the entire dreamy valley of Asheville. The afternoon wind howled softly through the pine needles, playing a melancholic, ancient symphony of the forest. The sharp scent of pine sap mixed with dry grass, creating an intoxicating aroma that put my mind at absolute ease. I sat down on the soft grass and began mixing oils on my palette. Today, I wanted to paint a sunset. Not a depressing, gloomy sunset, but a fiery, magnificent, and warm sunset, a symbol of rest after a long, grueling day and the promise of a brilliant sunrise tomorrow. My brush glided across the canvas, the burning orange of the dying sun, the deep violet of the twilight clouds, the dark, rich emerald of the pine forest. They all blended together, creating a vibrant, deeply emotional masterpiece. I painted in a state of Zen meditation, all worldly anxieties dissolved. It was just me and the colors. Professor Sullivan, out for a walk with his cane, spotted me and stopped. He didn't interrupt. He just stood silently beside me, offering a gentle smile. After a long while, he spoke softly. It's a breathtaking piece, Maya. It radiates total fulfillment and inner peace. That is the absolute pinnacle of art, and the pinnacle of a life well lived. I turned to look at my mentor, beaming. Thank you, Professor. It's because of you, and this beautiful land, that I finally understand what true happiness is. Happiness isn't living wrapped in silk and billions of dollars. It isn't being worshipped by high society. Happiness is simply the freedom to be exactly who you are, to do what sets your soul on fire, to merge with nature, and to keep your heart entirely free of the poison of hatred. I thought of Hunter and the old days. Everything felt like a long, distant dream that had finally ended. Hunter was paying the ultimate toll for his sins, living out his days in quiet, agonizing regret. And me, the woman he threw away like garbage, I was living the most spectacular, beautiful chapter of my life. I didn't need a mandolin on. I stood firmly on my own 2 feet, holding the brush to paint my own masterpiece of happiness. The sun slowly dipped below the mountains, draping the world in a glowing mantle of gold and orange. I packed up my gear and walked down the hill with Professor Sullivan. At the bottom of the ridge, my little wooden cabin was already lit. The warm, yellow light spilling from the windows looked like a lighthouse, safely guiding my soul home. I knew that from this moment forward, no matter how chaotic the world became, I would forever harbor this untouchable peace within my heart. The safest harbor isn't a massive mansion, and it isn't someone else's broad shoulders. The safest harbor is built inside your own heart when you learn to love yourself, when you learn to let go, and when you learn to cherish the simplest, purest things in life. My story closes here, but my life continues to turn its pages, bright and brimming with hope. I took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air and smiled in absolute contentment. Life is so incredibly beautiful once you finally learn to live it for yourself. Closing the book on the lives of Maya and Hunter, we suddenly realize that happiness is as fragile as morning dew. If you don't protect it, the rising sun will evaporate it into nothingness. This story isn't just a tragedy of a shattered family. It is a profound, blaring warning to anyone blindly chasing superficial vanity while neglecting the authentic, core values standing right beside them. The greatest lesson we see is that karma spares absolutely no one. Hunter sowed the wind, and he reaped the hurricane. He traded the loyal wife who suffered with him through poverty for fleeting moments of lust with a young, greedy mistress. Ultimately, He received nothing but absolute betrayal and isolation. Wealth and status are just external objects here today, gone tomorrow. The only thing of incalculable value is the shared loyalty and sacrifice between partners. When a successful man conveniently forgets the woman who burned her youth to act as his launchpad, it is the most despicable form of ingratitude. As for Maya, she teaches us a masterclass in letting go and reclaiming one's self-worth. A woman should never make her husband her entire universe or her sole reason for breathing. When betrayed, instead of drowning in toxic vengeance or desperately clinging to a corpse of a marriage, have the immense courage to stand up and walk away. Happiness isn't a handout from someone else. You create it with your own hands. Inner peace and total freedom are the ultimate destinations of human life. Forgiving others is simply cutting the ropes that bind you, allowing your soul to be light and serene. Life is far too short. Live it with honor and loyalty. Don't wait until everything is reduced to ashes to feel regret, because by then, it is far too late. Cherish the person beside you while you still can, because the most peaceful harbor in the world isn't some exotic destination. It's the home where a devoted partner is waiting for you at the dinner table every night.